I stared at the text message until my coffee turned cold. I didn't even realize it had happened. Outside my kitchen window, Christmas lights blinked across the street. Red, green, white, over and over. The neighborhood looked exactly the way my wife used to love this time of year. Inside my house, everything felt strangely quiet. The message had arrived at 6:14 on a Tuesday evening. It was from my son. "Dad, we've talked it over, and we think it's better if you celebrate Christmas on your own this year. Diane and I want to spend the holidays with just our little family. We hope you understand." I read it once, then again, then a third time. Each reading somehow made it feel less believable. Finally, I turned my phone over on the counter, picked up my coffee, took one sip. Cold. I poured it into the sink and simply stood there. Not angry. Not yet. Mostly embarrassed. There's a particular kind of embarrassment that comes from realizing you've been the last person to understand something everyone else already knew. That's how it felt. As if my son and his wife had quietly decided months ago that I no longer belonged, and I was only just receiving the invitation to my own exclusion. My name is Charles Whitmore. I'm 66 years old. For 41 years, I worked as a structural engineer. The first 3 decades designing bridges, parking garages, and commercial buildings. The last 10 as a senior consultant, helping younger engineers avoid mistakes before they became disasters. My entire career was built around one simple idea. If you ignore small cracks long enough, eventually something important collapses. Looking back now, the cracks in my family had been there for years. I just kept convincing myself they weren't serious. My son Nathan was 34. His wife Diane was 32. They had 2 wonderful children, Elliot, 7 years old, Sophie, who had just turned 5. I knew Sophie's birthday by heart. Not because Facebook reminded me, because I'd paid for the party. Actually, I'd been paying for almost everything. I don't like speaking vaguely about money. Numbers tell the truth better than feelings do. Nathan's mortgage? Mine. Nearly $3,000 every month. The house was still legally in my name because his credit wasn't strong enough when they wanted to buy it 3 years earlier. Both family cars? I covered those payments too. Nathan's insurance? Still on my policy after he'd lost his job during the pandemic. No one had ever bothered changing it back. Elliot's private school tuition? $1,400 every month. Diane insisted the local public school wasn't good enough. There was also the emergency credit card I'd given them years earlier. Groceries, household expenses, unexpected repairs. Every month, it quietly accumulated hundreds of dollars in purchases. When I finally added everything together, the total came to just over $90,000 every year. $90,000. To be told I should probably spend Christmas somewhere else. I wish I could tell you I immediately became furious. I didn't. Mostly, I stood there wondering how I'd failed to see what had been happening. After my wife Pauline died 6 years earlier, I threw myself into helping Nathan's family. Pancreatic cancer had taken her in only 8 months. 40 years together. Gone before either of us was ready. She always worried about Nathan, always believed he'd eventually find his footing. After she was gone, I convinced myself that helping him financially was another way of honoring her. Every mortgage payment, every tuition check, every transfer. I told myself, Pauline would have wanted this. Standing alone in my kitchen that December evening, I realized something painful. I hadn't just been helping my son. I'd been trying to buy my way into staying important. I picked up my phone again, not to call Nathan. Instead, I opened my banking app. The mortgage payment was scheduled to come out in 9 days. I stared at the green check mark beside the automatic transfer. My thumb hovered over the screen. One tap. That's all it would take. For several seconds, I couldn't move. Then I remembered the text. Celebrate Christmas on your own. I pressed Cancel Autopay. The banking app asked one final question. Are you sure? For the first time all evening, I was. I confirmed the cancellation. Next came Nathan's car payment. Canceled. Then Diane's. Canceled. I logged into my insurance account and started the paperwork to remove Nathan from my policy. It would take several business days. That was fine. Some things are worth waiting for. Then I looked at the supplementary credit card I'd issued for Diane. The most recent charges appeared on the screen. Home decor, lunch at a restaurant, holiday shopping. Normal purchases. Purchases she'd made without giving them a second thought. I called the number on the back of my card. I need to report this card lost. The representative verified my identity. Your replacement card will arrive in 5 to 7 business days. And the current one? It'll stop working within the hour. Perfect. When I hung up, the kitchen felt even quieter. There was one payment I didn't touch. Elliot's school tuition. I looked at it for a long time. My grandson hadn't sent that message. He was 7 years old. Children shouldn't pay for adults' mistakes. That payment stayed exactly where it was. I made myself another cup of coffee, hot this time, sat down at the kitchen table, and for the first time in years, I stopped confusing generosity with love. The next morning, I called my attorney. Gene Carter had been my attorney for nearly 15 years. He'd handled Pauline's estate after she passed. He drafted my will, helped me refinance my own home after retirement. More importantly, he was one of those rare professionals who knew the difference between listening and interrupting. When I called Wednesday morning, he answered on the second ring. Morning, Charles. You sound serious. I am. There was a brief pause. What happened? My son told me not to come for Christmas. Gene stayed quiet. He knew me well enough to let me finish. I've been paying most of his family's bills for years. I've decided that's over. Another pause. Then he asked the question I expected. What exactly do you want to do? I looked out the kitchen window before answering. I want to review my will. And I want to sell the house. The one Nathan's living in. Yes. He didn't react. No lectures, no dramatic warnings. Just the calm voice of a lawyer gathering facts. The property is still solely in your name. It is. And Nathan was never added to the deed? No. Then legally, you have every right to sell. Hearing someone else say it out loud made the decision feel real. Not emotional, just factual. Gene suggested we meet that afternoon. By 4 o'clock, I was sitting across from him in his office downtown. He had already pulled my file. The first thing we discussed wasn't the house. It was my will. I assume you want changes. I do. Nathan had always been listed as my primary heir. Pauline and I had written that document together years earlier, back when we believed life would unfold in a predictable order. Gene slid the papers across the desk. We can change anything you wish. I stared at the pages. Oddly enough, I didn't want revenge. I wasn't interested in cutting Nathan out forever. Not yet. I want time. Jean raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I don't want to rewrite my entire family because of one terrible week. I just don't want my current plans staying exactly as they are. He nodded slowly. I think that's wise. We adjusted several provisions. Nothing permanent, just enough to make sure my estate reflected my present reality instead of my past assumptions. Then we moved on to the house. Jean drafted a formal notice informing Nathan and Diane that I intended to place the property on the market. They would have 60 days to secure another place to live. Legally, I could have demanded less. Personally, I couldn't. There were 2 little children living there. They deserved stability, even if their parents had made poor decisions. I signed every page. Jean sealed the envelope. It'll go out certified tomorrow morning. I stood to leave. He walked me to the door. Charles, I turned. You're doing the right thing. I smiled faintly. I hope one day Nathan believes that. The certified letter arrived at Nathan's house on Friday morning. I know because my phone rang before I'd finished breakfast. Nathan. 7:52 a.m. I watched it vibrate across the table. Didn't answer. Not because I wanted to punish him, because I wasn't ready to have the most important conversation of our lives while standing over half-buttered toast. The phone stopped. 30 minutes later, it rang again. Nathan. Then Diane. Then Nathan again. By 9 o'clock, the calls came almost back to back. Finally, a text appeared. Dad, we got a letter from Jean. Please call me. What's going on? I read it, locked my phone, finished breakfast, washed my dishes, put on my winter coat, and went for my usual morning walk. I've been walking 45 minutes every day since my cardiologist insisted retirement wasn't an excuse to stop moving. The cold December air usually helped clear my mind. That morning, it mostly reminded me Christmas was getting closer. Inflatable snowmen leaned sideways in frozen front yards. Plastic reindeer glittered beneath frost. One enormous Santa had collapsed overnight and was lying face first across someone's lawn. Under different circumstances, Pauline would have laughed herself silly. I almost smiled thinking about it. When I returned home, my phone looked like it had survived a small emergency. 14 missed calls. 7 from Nathan. 4 from Diane. 3 from Diane's mother. Ellen. A woman I'd probably spoken to fewer than 15 times in my life. Apparently, she suddenly had very strong opinions about my finances. There was even a voicemail from Nathan's friend Pete. I'd met him twice, both times at backyard barbecues. Now he was calling to explain why I was making a terrible mistake. It amazed me how quickly people volunteer to spend someone else's money. I set the phone on the coffee table without listening to any of the messages. Pauline used to have a saying whenever people inserted themselves into problems that weren't theirs. She'd smile politely and say, "I think you've wandered into a room that doesn't belong to you." She never raised her voice. She never argued. Somehow, people always understood exactly what she meant. I missed her most on days like that. At exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon, I finally called Nathan back. I waited until then deliberately. I knew Diane usually picked the children up from school around that time. I wanted my son, not an audience. He answered before the second ring. "Dad!" His voice sounded panicked. "What is going on?" Why did a lawyer send us that letter? Because I asked him to. A long silence followed. Then, you're serious? I am. You're actually selling the house? Yes. But where are we supposed to live? I leaned back in my chair. My answer came quietly. I don't know, Nathan. Where were you expecting me to spend Christmas? Silence. Longer this time. Finally, he spoke. That's different. No, it isn't. I took a slow breath. For 3 years, I've been paying the mortgage on a home I don't live in. I've covered your cars, your insurance, your son's tuition. I've helped support your household because I believed I was helping family. But Tuesday night, you made something very clear. What? That you see me as someone who pays the bills, not someone who belongs at the table. I could hear him breathing. No interruption, no argument, just breathing. Then, quietly, Dad. I never thought about it like that. I know. That, more than anything else, was the problem. Nathan didn't say anything for several seconds. I could hear him breathing. Then he let out a slow sigh. Dad, I honestly didn't think the message would hurt you that much. I closed my eyes. It wasn't the answer I wanted. It wasn't even an apology. It was something else. A confession that he'd never stopped to imagine I had feelings of my own. You didn't think I'd be hurt? I thought... He struggled for the words. I don't know. I guess I thought you'd understand. I smiled sadly. Understand what? That Diane wanted one Christmas with just us. I would have understood that. What I don't understand is why you couldn't simply invite me for Christmas Eve. Or breakfast. Or even stop by afterward. You didn't ask for a different schedule. You asked for my absence. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything either of us had said. Finally, he spoke. I didn't realize how it sounded. I know. And that's exactly why we're having this conversation. Nathan began talking quickly, almost desperately. He explained that Diane had wanted to establish boundaries, that several of her friends spent holidays without grandparents, that everyone deserved time alone with their children. I listened without interrupting. When he finally finished, I asked a simple question. Nathan, when was the last time you invited me somewhere that I wasn't paying for? Silence. I waited. He didn't answer. When was the last time you called just to ask how I was doing? Still nothing. When was the last time you came over because you wanted to see your father instead of needing something? His breathing became uneven. I don't know. No, you don't, because it hasn't happened in years. Those words hurt me almost as much as they hurt him, because they weren't entirely his fault. I'd allowed our relationship to become transactional. Every time he had a financial problem, I solved it. Every time he struggled, I reached for my checkbook instead of asking difficult questions. I'd confused providing for him with parenting him. I'm not trying to punish you, I said. I need you to believe that. It feels like punishment. I understand why. But this didn't begin with canceling those payments. It began years ago. Neither of us noticed. He was quiet again. Then he asked the question he'd clearly been avoiding. So, are you really selling the house? Yes. Dad, the kids. I know. They'll have to change schools. Elliot won't. There was a pause. I left his tuition alone. You did? He's 7. He didn't send that text. I won't ask a child to carry adult consequences. For the first time during the conversation, Nathan sounded ashamed. I didn't even think about that. I know. You keep saying that because it's true. He lowered his voice. Diane is furious. I imagine she is. She says you're trying to control us. I almost laughed. Instead, I looked around my quiet living room. Photographs of Pauline, my old recliner, bookshelves filled with engineering manuals I'd never read again. If I wanted to control your life, Nathan, I would have done it years ago. What I'm doing now is the opposite. I'm stepping out of it. He didn't answer, because there wasn't much he could say. I'll give you 60 days. That's more time than the law requires. If you need advice about buying or renting, I'll help. You know I understand mortgages. I understand financing. I'll help you make good decisions. But I won't keep paying for decisions that aren't mine. His voice became very small. I never realized how much you were actually covering. That surprised me. You never added it up? No. Diane handled most of the bills. So you never asked? I guess... No. I didn't. I reached for the coffee that had gone cold beside me. Funny how often that seemed to happen lately. I did the math Tuesday night. It came to just over $90,000 a year. He gasped softly. I had no idea. I believe you. And that's part of the problem. Before ending the call, I said something I hadn't planned. I love you. The words came naturally, because they were true. No amount of disappointment changes that. He didn't answer right away. Eventually, he whispered, I know. Not, I love you too. Just, I know. We hung up. I sat alone in my living room for a long time, looking at the silent television, listening to the furnace hum against the December cold, wondering whether Pauline would have handled any of this differently. The answer came almost immediately. She would have had this conversation 5 years earlier. She never avoided difficult truths. I always had. Maybe that's why everything had been allowed to drift this far. The following week became one of the longest I'd experienced since Pauline's funeral. People I barely knew suddenly felt qualified to explain why I should keep paying another family's bills. Diane's mother left 2 more voicemails. A cousin I'd never met somehow found my Facebook account. One of Nathan's friends wrote that family should help family. I found that sentence interesting. No one seemed to ask whether family should also respect family. Jean assured me the paperwork was moving forward exactly as planned. The property would be listed after the holidays. Legally, everything was in order. Emotionally, nothing was. I slept lightly, read late into the night, took my morning walks, tried to keep life as ordinary as possible. Then one evening, there was a knock at my front door. I looked through the window. Nathan was standing on the porch, alone. And from the expression on his face, I knew this conversation would be very different from the last one. 12 days after that first text message, Nathan showed up at my front door. No phone call, no warning, just the sound of the doorbell on a cold Saturday morning. I glanced at the clock. 10:30. I happened to be making biscuits. One of the few recipes Pauline had ever managed to teach me without taking the mixing bowl away halfway through. My hands were covered in flour. I wiped them off on a kitchen towel before opening the door. Nathan looked exhausted. Not the kind of tired that comes from missing sleep, the kind that settles into a person's face after too many nights spent arguing with themselves. He'd lost weight. Or maybe guilt simply makes people look smaller. He was wearing the leather jacket I'd bought him 2 Christmases earlier. For a second, he looked like he was 20 years old again. "Can I come in?" His voice was almost hesitant. I stepped aside. "Of course." We sat across from each other at my kitchen table, the same table where Pauline used to balance the checkbook, the same table where I'd canceled nearly $90,000 worth of annual support less than 2 weeks earlier. Neither of us spoke at first. The bowl of biscuit dough sat between us. Nathan kept staring at it as though it might somehow begin the conversation for him. Finally, he took a deep breath. "I've been trying to figure out how all of this happened." "So have I." He nodded slowly. "I think I let people get inside my head." I didn't interrupt. "I want to hear all of it." He rubbed both hands together before speaking again. "A few years ago, Diane's parents started making comments." "What kind of comments?" "That you controlled me. They said I depended on your money because I never really became an adult." I remained silent. "They kept saying every favor came with invisible strings. That one day you'd remind me everything belonged to you." He laughed bitterly. I didn't believe them at first, but after hearing it enough times, it started sounding true. I leaned back in my chair. Did I ever threaten to take anything away? No. Did I ever tell you how to raise your children? No. Did I ever demand you spend holidays with me because I was paying? He looked down. No. So where were the strings? Nathan didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer, only assumptions. He sighed deeply. Diane grew up differently. I know. Her dad used money to manipulate everyone. If he bought something, he expected complete loyalty. If someone disagreed with him, he reminded them who paid the bills. I nodded. I've met men like that. Nathan continued. I think she started believing you were the same. And instead of questioning it, I accepted it. Because it was easier. He looked genuinely ashamed. I never stopped to compare what people were saying with how you'd actually treated us. Those words hung in the room. Sometimes, the hardest lies to recognize are the ones repeated often enough by people we trust. The oven timer suddenly beeped. Neither of us had noticed the time passing. I stood. Give me a second. When I opened the oven, I laughed. Nathan looked confused. What? I burned the biscuits. He walked over beside me. The edges were darker than they should have been, not ruined, just overdone. He smiled for the first time since arriving. Mom would have said you were talking too much. I chuckled. No. She would have said I was thinking too much. That made both of us laugh. Only for a moment. But it was the first normal moment we'd shared in weeks. I made fresh coffee, put the biscuits on a plate anyway. Sit. They're still edible. We carried everything back to the table. Nathan broke one open. Steam drifted upward. They're actually not bad. They're slightly burned. There's a difference. He nodded. I guess people survive both. I smiled. Sometimes. Then the smile faded. Nathan, I need you to understand something. I'm listening. I don't regret helping you. Not one mortgage payment. Not one tuition check. Not one birthday party. I'd do every one of those things again. His eyes lifted toward mine. But I regret replacing conversations with money. I thought writing checks was taking care of my son. What I was really doing was avoiding difficult conversations. I should have asked why you still couldn't afford the mortgage. I should have asked why every emergency somehow became mine. I should have asked whether you were building a life or simply borrowing one. Nathan swallowed hard. I know. No. I shook my head gently. You understand it today. I need you to understand it 5 years from now. He nodded. I will. I promise. I believed he meant it. Whether he'd still mean it months later, only time could answer that. I also need to tell you something. He looked nervous again. I'm not canceling the sale. His shoulders dropped. I figured. This isn't punishment. It's a reset. You and Diane need to build something that's actually yours. Not something I quietly finance while pretending everything is healthy. He stared down at his coffee. I've never really handled our finances. Diane did. I just assumed we were okay. I couldn't hide my surprise. You never asked? He shook his head. I was afraid of the answer. That sentence explained more than he probably realized. Fear has a way of turning intelligent people into passive ones, and passivity has consequences. Before you left, Nathan stood awkwardly beside the front door. I don't know if things can ever go back to the way they were. They shouldn't. He looked confused. If they do, then we learned nothing. He nodded slowly. What I want, I continued, is something better. A relationship where you visit because you want to, not because the mortgage is due. He smiled faintly. I'd like that. So would I. I opened the front door. Cold December air drifted inside. Nathan stepped onto the porch. Halfway to his car, he turned around. I love you, Dad. It was the first time I'd heard those words from him in longer than I cared to remember. I smiled. I love you too. I watched him drive away. Then I walked back inside. The kitchen still smelled like coffee and slightly burned biscuits. For the first time since that text message arrived, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief, not victory. Hope. Small, fragile, but real. Nathan left just before noon. I stood at the front window until his car disappeared around the corner. The house felt different afterward. Not lighter, not heavier, just quieter. For the first time in a long while, silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like space. Space for something new. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Word had spread through Diane's side of the family faster than I expected. Apparently, I had become the villain in a story I hadn't even been invited to tell. Diane's mother left another voicemail, then another, both asking how I could do this to my own grandchildren. I never called her back. The grandchildren weren't losing their home because I had stopped helping. They were losing a house their parents had never actually been able to afford. There was a difference, a painful one. but an important one. A few days later, I received a message on Facebook from someone named Bryce. According to his profile, he was Diane's cousin. I had never met him. He informed me that I was selfish, vindictive, petty. Then he suggested that Pauline would have been ashamed of me. That sentence made me stop reading. No stranger who had never shared a meal with my wife had the right to speak for her. I blocked him without replying. Some conversations deserve answers. Others deserve silence. Life, however, has a remarkable way of insisting on ordinary routines. Every morning, I still walked through the neighborhood. The Christmas lights gradually disappeared as December faded into January. Trees that had glowed with thousands of tiny white bulbs returned to bare branches. Children dragged discarded Christmas trees to the curb with their parents. The season moved on. So did I. One afternoon, my neighbor Bernard knocked on my door, carrying a casserole. "My wife made too much again," he said with a grin. "I've known Margaret for 28 years," I replied. "I don't think she's ever accidentally cooked too much." He laughed. "You caught us." We sat at my kitchen table, eating casserole and talking about absolutely nothing important. The city still hadn't repaired the pothole at the end of our street. His favorite football team was probably going to miss the playoffs again. The weather forecast predicted another cold front. Not once did he ask about Nathan. Not once did he mention the house. When he left, I realized something. Real friendship doesn't always arrive with advice. Sometimes it arrives carrying dinner and knows exactly what not to say. By the second week of January, the house officially went on the market. The realtor called after the first weekend. "We've already had 8 showings." I wasn't surprised. It was a beautiful home. 4 bedrooms, good schools, quiet neighborhood. I'd helped design part of the renovation myself. Nathan called that evening. His voice sounded calmer than it had in weeks. "We found a rental." I leaned back in my chair. "That's good." "It's smaller." "I expected that." "The kids will have to share a room." "They'll survive." A brief silence. Then he surprised me. "I think it'll actually force us to figure things out." "What do you mean?" I never realized how little I knew about our finances. I let Diane handle everything. I just assumed we'd always manage somehow. And now? Now I've spent 3 straight nights looking at budgets. I smiled to myself. Welcome to adulthood. He laughed softly. I guess I'm a little late. It's never too late. Moving day arrived in early February. Nathan insisted he could handle it. I showed up anyway, driving the rental truck myself. He walked outside shaking his head. "Dad, you didn't have to do this." "I know. I wanted to." He opened his mouth as if to protest, then closed it again. Instead, he hugged me. Not the quick, awkward kind men often give each other. A real hug. The sort that says things words struggle to explain. "I missed you," he admitted quietly. "I've been here the whole time." "I know." "That's what makes it worse." The new rental house was modest. 3 bedrooms, smaller yard, older appliances, nothing fancy. Sophie immediately ran into the backyard. "There's room for my swing!" She announced it like she'd discovered a castle. Children have a wonderful ability to measure wealth differently than adults. Elliot was less enthusiastic. He sat quietly on the back steps while boxes were carried inside. I walked over and sat beside him. "You okay, buddy?" He nodded, then shook his head. I'll miss my old room. I know. So will I. He looked up at me. Did I do something wrong? That question nearly broke me. No, I answered without hesitation. Absolutely not. This isn't because of you. Then why did we move? I chose my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. The important part is fixing them. He thought about that, then nodded once. I can help unpack. I smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. By sunset, the truck was empty. Boxes filled every room. Nathan stood beside me in the driveway. I've been thinking. Dangerous habit. He laughed. I know. Then his expression became serious. I don't want us to go back. I don't either. I want us to be different. So do I. He looked toward the house where Diane was helping Sophie unpack toys. I'm not asking you to pay for anything. I won't. I know. And honestly, I think that's exactly what we need. As I drove home that evening, I realized something. For years, I'd believed love meant carrying someone else's weight. Maybe real love sometimes means putting it back into their hands so they can discover they're stronger than they ever imagined. Spring arrived quietly that year. The last patches of snow disappeared from the shaded corners of the neighborhood. The trees outside my kitchen window filled with new leaves. Life has a funny way of reminding you that nothing stays frozen forever. Not seasons, not grief, not even families. Nathan and Diane had been living in their rental house for nearly 3 months. They were making it work, not because someone else was paying the bills, because they finally knew exactly what those bills were. One Saturday afternoon, Nathan stopped by, carrying 2 cups of coffee. No moving boxes, no paperwork, no crisis. He simply knocked on my door. I was in the neighborhood. I smiled. Were you? He grinned. No. I drove 20 minutes. I just wanted to see you. That simple sentence meant more to me than any expensive gift ever could. We sat on the back patio while birds hopped across the lawn looking for worms after the morning rain. For a while, we talked about absolutely ordinary things. His job, a new bridge project my old firm had started, the baseball season, Sophie's latest obsession with drawing horses, Elliot's first goal in youth soccer. There wasn't a single conversation about mortgages, or credit cards, or money. It felt unfamiliar and wonderful. Halfway through our second cup of coffee, Nathan looked at me. I started using a budget. I laughed. I never thought I'd hear you say that. I know. I actually know where every dollar goes now. And it's terrifying. I couldn't help smiling. It gets less terrifying. I think Diane and I had our first real conversation about money. What do you mean? We'd always talked about paying bills. We'd never talked about why we kept needing help. He leaned back in his chair. I think we were both pretending. Pretending what? That if you kept helping, we'd eventually catch up. But we never changed anything. I nodded slowly. Support without responsibility becomes dependency. He stared at the yard. I didn't understand that before. I know. But I do now. A week later, Elliot invited me to a soccer game. Not because Nathan asked him to, because Elliot wanted Grandpa there. When I arrived, he spotted me from across the field. Grandpa! He sprinted toward me with grass stains already covering both knees. You came! I told you I would. I scored last week. I heard. I'm going to score again today. Then I'd better pay attention. He wrapped his small arms around my waist before running back to his team. Children have an extraordinary ability to love without keeping score. Watching him laugh with his friends, I realized something. None of this had damaged my relationship with my grandchildren. If anything, it had protected it. Because one day, when they were old enough to understand, they would know their grandfather loved them enough to tell the truth, even when it was difficult. That summer, Nathan called me with unexpected news. Dad, I paid off the smaller car. Already? We sold a bunch of stuff we didn't really need. He laughed. You'd be amazed how much money people spend buying things they forget they own. I've been amazed by that for decades. There was a pause. Can I tell you something? Always. I used to think you were trying to control my life. And now? I think you were trying to protect me. He hesitated. But somewhere along the way, you started protecting me from growing up. I smiled sadly. I think you're right. And I let you. We both did. Neither of us blamed the other. Because blame wasn't going to build anything. Understanding might. Christmas arrived again, almost exactly 1 year after the message that changed everything. This time, my phone buzzed on the first Sunday in December. It was Nathan, not a text, a phone call. Dad? Yeah? I wanted to ask you something before we made any plans. I'm listening. We're hosting Christmas dinner. I waited quietly. We'd really like you to come. There was no hesitation, no uncomfortable pause, no carefully chosen wording. Just a son inviting his father to Christmas. I'd love to. We were hoping you'd say that. And I have one more request. What is it? Will you make your biscuits? I laughed so hard I had to wipe my eyes. The slightly burned ones? The kids say those are the best kind. I think your grandmother would disagree. Maybe. But she's not here to argue. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We were both thinking about Pauline. I was certain of it. Finally, Nathan said quietly, I think Mom would have liked where we ended up. I looked toward the photograph sitting on the bookshelf across the room. The same smiling picture I'd talked to more times than I could count over the past 6 years. So do I. Christmas morning felt different. Not because everything had returned to the way it used to be. It hadn't. The house Nathan rented was smaller. The presents were fewer. Dinner wasn't nearly as elaborate as it had been when I was paying for everything. But something important had changed. No one was pretending anymore. Nathan paid for the groceries. Diane cooked most of the meal. I brought my slightly overbaked biscuits. Elliot insisted they were perfect. Sophie showed me an entire sketchbook filled with horses. After dinner, Nathan helped me wash the dishes without being asked. As we stood shoulder to shoulder at the sink, he quietly said, "Thank you." I looked over. For what? For loving me enough to stop making my life easy. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I handed him another plate to dry. Finally, I smiled. That's what fathers are supposed to do. I've spent a great deal of time thinking about that first message, the one telling me to spend Christmas alone. For a while, I believed it had been the worst thing my son ever gave me. I was wrong. It turned out to be the beginning of the first honest relationship we'd ever had as adults. Looking back now, I don't remember the canceled payments as clearly as I remember the conversations that followed. Money had kept us connected. Truth brought us closer. If there's one thing I've learned after 66 years, it's this. Love isn't measured by how much you give. It's measured by whether your giving helps someone become stronger, or simply makes it easier for them to remain dependent. I spent years believing I was holding my family together. In reality, I was carrying them. The day I finally set that weight down, they discovered they could stand on their own. And so did I.